Well, good afternoon. It is indeed my great pleasure to introduce Secretary John Bryson, our 37th Secretary of Commerce in the United States of America. Secretary Bryson was appointed by President Obama on October 21st, 2011. Prior to his appointment, he has spent over 30 years in the business world, including 18 years as the Chairman CEO of Edison International. I know Senator Bryson very well because he used to be our neighbor in South Pasadena. Actually, for those of you who were at the conference 12 years ago in LA, the Committee 100 conference 12 years ago in LA, we actually host a dinner party at Andrew Cheung's house in South Pasadena. The party, because of all the members getting all excited, having a good time, getting louder and louder and louder. In fact, the neighbor that we disturbed, the next door neighbor we disturbed, was John and Louise Bryson. So I think that maybe, Louise, is that the reason why you guys moved to San Marino? But all kidding aside, President Obama couldn't have picked a better candidate to be the Commerce Secretary than our Honorable John Bryson. Because not only for that many years of experience he had at Edison International, he's the man that knows a lot about regulations, bureaucracy. He also understands traditional energy, new energy, clean energy, alternative energy. But in addition to that, he has always been also active in the corporate world besides just Edison International. His previous board experience include Boeing Company, also Coda, an electric car company. And in addition to that, he was also on the board of Disney. So any kind of business that are doing business between US and China, from export to import, consumer to clean energy, et cetera, he had involved with it. So with his great experience in the past in the business world, I can't think of anybody in America that really know about what's going on in today's world business and what we need to do in terms of engaging with this US and China relationship. And I know that ever since he became Secretary of Commerce, he's been really, really busy traveling around the world. In fact, right after he got appointed, he was in Hawaii for the APEC meeting, meeting with the senior government officials from China. And just recently, back in February, when the Vice President Xi Jinping was in Los Angeles and in Washington, D.C., and Secretary Bryson was with him throughout the time and accompanying him and his delegation and talk about how we can better improve trade and investment between U.S. and China. So without further ado, let's all welcome Secretary John Bryson.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for that warm welcome. And it really is an honor and a great treat to be with you here today. Of course, I've known so many of you, and it's wonderful to be home since my home is maybe 10 blocks from here. Several of you know that. And the influence that you have and the respect that you have around the entire country is great and very, very important. Let me start by saying a special thank you to Dominic. Dominic is, so I say the Cheungs, it's wonderful to see you here. Thank you very much. So I don't know about that evening when Cheung right next door and you guys making all kinds of noise here. I don't remember that exactly, but we certainly valued the friendship and the relationships in every respect. And I want to thank you for this special invitation to provide this closing and keynote speech. You've had my wife, Louise, those of you who at least know us will know that she was an enormously enthusiastic participation last night. In fact, I got in from Washington last night somewhat earlier than expected, and I couldn't get into our house because she was over here and had the key, and I couldn't get in the house. So, in any event, I heard from her about the wonderful presentations last night. Mike Milliken setting the stage by discussing education, immigration, and health, which are all, of course, critical issues for both the U.S. and China. And you also heard from LA's extraordinary universities and their leaders, as well as local Congresswoman Judy Chu, who is making a real difference here and in Washington, and then many others. John Chin of Sybase, a wonderful friend, has been here, I think, at least some of the gathering, and of course the Disney board. We worked together on many things, and then I persuaded him to join the board at Caltech. So all these things come together somehow. And one thing that I'm struck with is the top Chinese American leaders across a number of industries. Those of you in this Committee of 100 reflect the tapestry of contributions that 3.8 million Chinese Americans make here and around the world. So you set a standard, you lead the way, and it's clear that each of you play a crucial role in building a strong bridge between U.S. and China. And that's what I want to talk about in these presentations. I want to congratulate the committee, for example, on releasing this new public perception survey. My wife Louise brought it home to me last night. So I understand Dominic said you have to read this. And Louise did, and she gave me a summary. I had to make another presentation earlier today, so hadn't had a chance to fully review it, but I know that a large portion of it relates to our economic and commercial relationship, and that is what I propose to talk to today. It's clear that the world's two largest economies are more intertwined each day. And your mission, and I get it from your charter, to, quote, bring a Chinese-American perspective to issues concerning Asian Americans and U.S.-Chinese relations, relates directly to what I will talk about here. There can be little doubt whatsoever that we must continue with intensity to build a truly mutually beneficial and a balanced economic relationship between U.S. and China. So, if we look back, we've already come a long way. As you know, this year marks the 40th anniversary of Nixon's historic trip to China. That time, he rightly predicted that a bridge would be built between China and the U.S., but I think we all would agree that even he would be amazed by just how far this has come. China has lifted hundreds of millions of its people out of poverty. China is now the second largest economy in the world and America's second largest trading partner. And our bilateral trade, both ways, topped $500 billion this last year. So consider this: over the past 3 years, President Obama and President Hu have met 10 times. 10 times. Also, we are working together as members of the G20 and the APEC, and we maintain 2 bilateral dialogues. Number one, the Joint Commission on Commerce and Trade, which I co-lead annually with Vice Premier Wang Qishan. And secondly, the Strategic and Economic Dialogue, which I will join in less than 2 weeks from now in China with Secretaries Geithner and Clinton. And in February, Vice President Biden and I, Dominic touched on this, so I won't take it any further, but we worked together, the Vice President and I, throughout Vice President Xi's visit to both Washington and here in LA. And the focus throughout that trip was our economic and trade relations and how we can move forward in a mutually beneficial way in this economy in which there are opportunities for both of us to lead the way. So today it's clear that China and the U.S. have benefited greatly from our growing economic relationship. Now we must take further steps to unlock our full potential with balanced growth. We face great challenges, but even greater opportunities as we work hard to find this common ground. And the prosperity and well-being of people in China, in America, in fact, as I think you all know, around the world, will be deeply affected by how well we cooperate and lead together. So I'd like to talk now about just a few ways in which I think we can do just that. First, it's clear that American manufacturing will remain a key part of the U.S.-China relationship. I have the honor of leading the administration's efforts across the entire federal government in manufacturing. The President himself has been driving home the importance of U.S. manufacturing. 70% of America's R&D, and even more striking in some ways, 90% of America's patents are in manufacturing. So preparing and strengthening this sector is absolutely essential. Already, we are seeing a comeback of sorts. After a decade in which we lost, here in the U.S., lost nearly 6 million manufacturing jobs, we've now added nearly 500,000 in just the past 25 months. So 500,000, 25 months, just over 2 years. And importantly, these tend to be high-paying jobs with good benefits for middle-class working families throughout America's diverse communities. In other words, all over our country. And we need to build on that momentum, and that's why the President has proposed a number of plans that support corporate tax reform, education, training, R&D, and many more. And this is also good news for Chinese Americans who lead or work at manufacturing companies like GE and Dell, which I'm told are represented on this committee. And then the striking thing, and it's important, is this is good directly for China, too. China should welcome American-made goods to address its growing needs, just as the U.S. is open to Chinese-made goods. And of course, China's growing middle class wants access to our consumer products and services more than ever before. So that leads me to exports. U.S. goods exported to China, this is striking, have grown by almost 50% over the past 2 years. That's exports from here to China. They topped $100 billion for the first time in 2011. The Commerce Department's 120 commercial service officers in China have contributed to that growth. So those are our people in China, commercial service, and I should note that is twice the number that we have in any other country, obviously reflecting the important relationship here, the bilateral relationship. However, at the same time, the goods trade deficit with China grew last year by about 30%. So this imbalance means that we must continue to work harder to help U.S. exports reach China. And leveling the playing field is an important way to do that. I'll give you one example. I often hear of U.S. businesses wanting to sell to China, but they have concerns surrounding their intellectual property, including trade secret protection, and being forced to transfer their technology, the U.S. companies. And as you know, U.S. competitiveness is driven in large part by ideas and innovation that are protected by intellectual property. And China knows that it cannot become an innovation-driven economy without stronger respect for intellectual property. So during last year's Joint Commission on Commerce and Trade, I had intense discussions with Vice Premier Wang Qishan. We're making progress in this area. For example, he is now leading a high-level leadership structure to strengthen IP enforcement, very significant step. And then perhaps even more, provincial leaders in China will now be measured based on intellectual property enforcement in their own regions. That is, they need to do that. Wang Qishan is overseeing that they see to it that they get that done. And China has accelerated the deadlines for provinces and municipal governments to use only legal software. So American businesses look forward intensely to even more commitments like that that are backed up with action. So on a broader level, I was pleased during the Vice President Xi visit that China again made general commitment to expand imports and promote more balanced trade. That was a big focus of those meetings. And already we see the potential for greater U.S. entertainment services exports, and maybe you've just been talking about that, and enhanced cultural exchange, as Disney, for example, brings an iconic American experience to Shanghai in the just few years ahead. And then in addition, during the Xi visit, China agreed to open up its automobile liability insurance market to foreign countries. Now, some of you may say that's not a big deal, though probably not a lot of people in this room. That is a very big deal. First time our insurance companies have the opportunity to compete for and provide that business. And to say that's important is an understatement, because China's automobile market is and will be over the decade ahead the largest in the world. And as I'm sure was mentioned in the previous panel, China will now allow more films and fairer compensation for movies distributed in China. And that's important because China had a 29% rise in box office earnings in 2011. Maybe you've touched on that. And if there is one thing I think that Chinese and American people certainly have in common, it's that we love our movies. So all of these steps to balance our trade relationship are good for China, good for America, and they're good for the global economy. So, and then let me turn to something further. U.S. companies have very substantial investments in China. Yes, U.S. in China investments totaling over $60 billion. And I'm sure that includes some of those that are likely represented here today. These firms stand ready to invest even more, especially if China supports more openness and transparency in approving foreign investments. And what's critical here is the other side of that equation is equally important. Overall, foreign direct investment in the U.S. has been strong. So now I'm talking around the world, investments in the U.S. been very strong. So, for example, $228 billion in investments in businesses, in operations here in the U.S., and that was very, very sharply up from the preceding year. And building on that is one of my top priorities at the Commerce Department. So I'm thrilled to see more CEOs from around the world to choose putting their next factory, their next operations, right here in the U.S. And this is due to our productivity, our intellectual property protections, our universities, our R&D base, our deep supply chains, and of course, our talented workforce. And then going back to China in particular, it is now very encouraging to see more Chinese companies looking to invest in operations, in businesses right here in the U.S. China's investment in the U.S. to date is only around $6 billion, so not a lot, 1/10 of the U.S. investment in China. And that's relatively small compared to many other countries that have invested their operations, their facilities directly here in the U.S. That's common. But here's something quite striking. China is now becoming the fastest growing source of investment in the U.S. It still isn't large, but with respect to that, what I want all to understand is that our message with respect to that is clear. We welcome Chinese companies that see the benefits of choosing the U.S. when they build facilities and create new jobs. So then let me take you just one step further into that. Select USA. Select USA is an initiative that the President announced a year ago, strongly supports, has become yet more focused on. And again, this is being carried out by the U.S. Commerce Department, and it is the first coordinated effort by our government to encourage more foreign direct investment in the U.S. So foreign direct investment has taken place, but it's not been organized. We've not reached out. We've not made special efforts to encourage this. As I mentioned, we have 120 commercial service officers in China, so all over China. And in addition to their traditional role, which has been promoting U.S. exports to China, these people are now trained to help China's business leaders invest more right here in the U.S. They will serve as an information clearinghouse. They will help when companies face confusion, delays, or obstacles, as well at the state and local levels as at the federal levels. And they will help after those companies have invested. They'll help carry the investments yet further. Now, moving forward, the Commerce Department will provide more opportunities to make the person-to-person connections that help get these deals done. And I think it is likely that many of you are getting deals done, maybe even right here at this conference. I hope that's the case. And on that note, I want to invite the business leaders here today to something. This is, I think, a special opportunity. It's exciting to us. The first Select USA Investment Summit will be this summer in Washington, D.C. And companies from around the world are coming, and they will meet with U.S. officials at all levels of government, so local, regional, state level, federal. And in all these areas, so manufacturing, exports, direct investment, our common theme is growth through balance. It's no longer appropriate or sustainable to think of our bilateral relationships as one in which China simply produces and America simply consumes. That over time won't work. But instead, both of our governments must take steps to move our respective economies to a more healthy balance of consumption, savings, investment, production, and exports. And then, in addition, as the largest economies in the World Trade Organization, no one has a greater stake in an open, rules-based global trading system than our two countries, the U.S. and China. And we must lead, each of us must lead by example. That means that both countries must live up to our commitments in order to ensure a strong global economy. So we are watching the steps that China is taking in regard to its currency trading ban. An announcement was made about 2 days ago. We're following that closely, and as Secretary Geithner, the Secretary of the Treasury, said last week, and I spoke with him today, I spoke with him yesterday, it is very important for us that China continue and take further steps to allow their exchange rate to rise against the dollar. the administration is keenly aware that many members of Congress are increasingly outspoken, as, for example, as recently as yesterday in a hearing I was in on the Hill. So currency as well as trade imbalances need to be addressed. Before I close, I'd like to reference a speech that our President, President Obama, gave, emphasizing that the U.S. is a Pacific power. He said the U.S. will play a larger and longer-term role in shaping this region and its future by upholding core principles in close partnership, he said, with our allies and our friends. And already the administration has enhanced American ties with Japan, Korea, Thailand, and the Philippines. We've broadened our relationships with emerging powers like India, where I was just 2 weeks ago for a week, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Singapore. And we've re-engaged with Burma. More importantly, we've become more active in the East Asia Summit and ASEAN, and we're moving forward with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a high-caliber trade agreement. So, let me simply say that, in short, this administration is working around the clock to do everything possible to advance prosperity and security throughout the Asia-Pacific. And, as you all know, a cornerstone of that effort is a positive and cooperative relationship mutually with China. So, in closing, we face together both considerable challenges, but also great potential in the future of the U.S.-China relationship. We cannot afford to stand still or be content with the progress we have already made together. Now more than ever, we must ensure a strong foundation for our relationship to grow and thrive. The next generation, our children, our grandchildren, the next generation is counting on us. And I am optimistic that indeed we can, especially through the strong support, guidance, and leadership of the very accomplished members of this distinctive committee. So, in this year of the dragon, let's commit ourselves to bringing strength, prosperity, and good fortune to the people of both the U.S. and China. Thank you very much.